I was holding the casserole dish with both hands when my phone buzzed against my hip, and I almost didn't look at it because the dish was warm through the oven mitts and my car was still running in the driveway with the door open. But something made me glance down. A text from Claire, 4 lines long. I read it standing in my own kitchen, in my good blouse, with the potato dish getting heavier by the second. And I didn't cry. I didn't drop the dish. I just stood there and read it twice. She had uninvited me for my granddaughter's baby shower, 2 days before it happened, in a text message with a period at the end of every sentence, like punctuation could make it kinder. I set the dish down on the counter very slowly because my hands wanted to shake and I would not let them. That's not how I was raised to receive bad news. My mother used to say a woman who lets her hand shake has already lost the room. So I turned off the oven, I took off the mitts, and I stood in my kitchen for a long moment, looking at a text message that had taken 30 seconds to write and had just erased 6 years of birthdays, 6 years of babysitting, 6 years of showing up. I didn't cry. I just stood there. My name is Eleanor Marsh. Everyone who matters calls me Ellie.
I'm 68 years old, and I have lived in this house for 41 years, since before my son David could walk, since before the oak tree in the backyard was tall enough to shade the porch. I was a bookkeeper for 30 years at a construction firm downtown, the kind of job nobody thinks about until the numbers don't add up, and then suddenly everyone wants to know your name. I balanced payroll for 80 men who thought accounting was something that happened by magic. I know how to make numbers behave. I know how to find the one line in a ledger that's wrong when 40 pages look right. My husband, Robert, passed 6 years ago. Heart, sudden, on a Tuesday, in the garage, with a wrench still in his hand, because he was always fixing something, even when nothing needed fixing. We were married 42 years. He used to say I was the only person he knew who could smile while she was winning an argument. I think about that a lot now. David is our only son. Good boy growing up, soft-hearted. The kind of soft that I used to think was strength, before I learned the difference. He married Claire 8 years ago, and I welcomed her the way you're supposed to, with open arms, casserole dishes, and the quiet hope that she'd love him the way he needed to be loved. She had a baby girl 18 months ago, my granddaughter, Sophie. And when Claire told me she was pregnant again, I cried real tears, the good kind, the kind you don't hide. I tell you all of this because you need to understand what 6 years actually looks like before I tell you how it ended. It looked like me driving 40 minutes every Sunday with a casserole dish. It looked like me paying for the crib the first time and paying for half the nursery renovation the second time, though nobody ever called it that out loud. It looked like me showing up, until the day I wasn't allowed to anymore. Tuesday came gray and steady, the kind of gray that doesn't threaten rain, it just sits there. That was the day the text arrived. But if you want to understand why a text like that could exist at all, I have to take you backward first. Because this wasn't the first time. It was just the first time she put it in writing. The Christmas of 2019, Claire hosted for the first time. I brought a ham because David told me not to bring anything, and I brought one anyway, the way mothers do. Claire took one look at it on the counter and said in front of everyone, "Oh, we're actually doing a modern menu this year, but thank you for trying." I put on my coat 2 hours later and drove home in the dark, and I told myself it was nothing. New wife, finding her footing. I gave her grace. The summer of 2021, Sophie's first birthday, I spent 3 weeks sewing a quilt by hand, the kind my own mother taught me to make, with little embroidered stars. Claire posted photos of the party online. The quilt wasn't in a single one. When I asked, gently, if Sophie liked it, Claire said, "Oh, we keep the good stuff put away so it doesn't get ruined." It's still put away. I checked once when I was watching Sophie for the weekend. Still folded, still in the box. The spring of 2023, I offered to help with the nursery for the second baby. Not offered. I paid for it. The crib, the dresser, half the paint and labor, because David asked quietly, the way he does when he doesn't want Claire to know he asked.
Claire thanked me at the door with a hug that lasted exactly as long as it takes to close a door on someone. And then, this past November, at Thanksgiving, I overheard her on the phone in the hallway, thinking I was still in the kitchen. She was talking to her sister. She said, "I love Ellie, I do, but she makes everything about her. It's exhausting, honestly." Her sister must have said something back, because Claire laughed, a small, tired laugh, and said, "I know. I just wish she'd take a hint sometime." I stood in that hallway with a dish towel in my hand, and I did not make a sound. I went back to the kitchen and I dried the dishes that were already dry. That wasn't even the worst thing the two of them were hiding that year, but I didn't know that yet. 2 weeks after that Thanksgiving call, I got the invitation to the baby shower. A nice one, printed, cream cardstock, my name spelled correctly. Eleanor Marsh, it said, right there under David's mother, and Claire's looping handwriting. I put it on my refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a sunflower, and every morning for 6 weeks I looked at it while I made my coffee, and I let myself feel included. I let myself feel like the November phone call was just Claire being tired, the way people get tired, the way I used to get tired of my own mother-in-law once, God rest her. I bought a gift, a good one, not flashy, just good, hand-stitched, soft yellow, the kind of blanket that lasts 20 years and still smells like a baby when you pull it out of the closet for the next one. I wrapped it myself, careful corners, because I was raised to believe presentation is a form of respect. I even bought a new blouse. 68 years old, and I bought a new blouse for my granddaughter's baby shower, because some part of me, the part that still wanted to be loved, the part that hadn't fully listened to that hallway phone call, thought maybe this was the day things got better. 2 days before the shower, the text came. "Hi, Ellie. I hope you understand, but we've decided to keep the shower small and immediate family only on my side this time. We just want it low-key. I know you'll understand. Talk soon." 4 sentences, a period after every single one, like she'd practiced it. I read it standing in my kitchen with the casserole dish getting heavy in my hands, and here is the part I need you to understand, the part that changed everything. I wasn't devastated by the exclusion. Not really. I'd half expected something after November. What I couldn't stop staring at was one word. Immediate. Immediate family. On her side. I am not on her side. I never will be by blood. But I have paid this family's bills more times than anyone in that house would admit out loud, and I raised the man standing next to her at the altar. And I have shown up to every single event that mattered for 6 straight years with a dish in my hands and a smile on my face. And she used the word immediate, like I was a stranger who'd wandered in off the street. I set the dish down. I did not cry. I called the caterer number that was still printed at the bottom of the invitation, out of some strange, cold curiosity, and I asked one simple question. "Can you tell me the total for the Sophie and baby shower booking under the name Claire Marsh?" The young woman on the phone, kindly, apologetically, told me she couldn't give out billing details to anyone but the account holder. "That's fine," I said. "I am the account holder." There was a pause, papers shuffling. And then she read me back a number that I already knew, because I was the one who'd paid the deposit on it 11 weeks earlier, using the account that still, to this day, has my name first on it. That wasn't even the worst thing that folder was going to reveal. But that was the moment I stopped feeling hurt and started feeling something much quieter, something much more useful. If you've ever stood in your own kitchen and felt the exact second your softness turned into something colder and more capable, you know exactly what I mean. Stay with me. This is where it starts to turn. I want to explain something about myself because it matters for what comes next. I was not always the woman who calls a caterer and asks pointed questions in a level voice. I used to be the woman who cried in her car in a grocery store parking lot rather than let anyone see me upset. Robert used to say I had 2 settings, warm and quiet, and that people who didn't know me mistook the quiet for weak. Robert knew better. Robert used to say, "Ellie, you're the only person I've ever met who can end an argument by simply stopping talking." He said it like a compliment, because it was one. 3 days after he died, I found a small brown envelope in the bottom drawer of his desk, the one that sticks if you don't lift while you pull. Inside was a folded letter, dated 4 years before he passed, and a set of documents I didn't fully understand at the time. The letter said, in his handwriting, careful and slanted the way it always was. Ellie, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and you're probably doing that thing where you think you have to handle everything alone. You don't. Everything in the second envelope is yours, clean, in your name only. I did that on purpose. Not because I didn't trust David, because I know how families get when there's a little bit of money in the room. Protect yourself first. You've spent your whole life protecting everyone else. I kept that letter in the same drawer in this house for 6 years. I read it maybe 4 times a year. Once on our anniversary, once on the anniversary of the day he died, and twice more whenever life got complicated enough that I needed to hear him say it again in my head. I read it that Tuesday night, after the phone call to the caterer. I sat at his old desk with the lamp on, and I read the letter one more time, and for the first time in 6 years, I understood exactly why he'd written it. Not if I ever needed it. He'd known I would. 3 days later. I want you to understand that 3 days is not very long, but it was long enough. I did not call David. I did not text Claire back. I let the silence sit there the way you let a stain sit before you decide whether it's worth the effort of scrubbing. Instead, I went to the second drawer of Robert's old desk, the one with the sticky slide, and I pulled the second envelope. Inside was a folder I had looked at exactly twice in 6 years, and understood, if I'm honest, maybe half of. A property deed, a home equity line of credit, opened the year before Robert died, in my name only, against a small rental property we'd bought together in 1994 and never sold, the one David didn't even know still existed because we'd stopped talking about it years ago. And a trust document, drawn up quietly, naming me sole trustee of a modest fund Robert had built from overtime and careful investing across 4 decades, a fund that had, without anyone in this family knowing, been quietly paying for exactly the kind of things a young couple never asks where the money came from. Cribs, down payments on renovations, deposits on catering halls for baby showers. I called the number on the letterhead, a firm downtown, the kind with a receptionist who still says, "How may I direct your call?" instead of, "What's up?" I asked for Mr. Whitfield, the attorney whose name Robert had written on a sticky note clipped to the folder 6 years earlier, in case he'd written, in case you ever need someone who already knows the whole story. Mr. Whitfield picked up on the second ring. Older man, dry voice, the kind of voice that's heard every family story there is and stopped being surprised by any of them sometime around 1995. "Eleanor Marsh?" he said, before I even finished introducing myself. "I wondered when I'd hear from you. You knew this was coming?" "Robert set this up very carefully," he said. "He told me, more than once, that he suspected someday you'd need to remember it was there. I take it that day has arrived." I told him everything. The Christmas ham, the quilt in the box, the hallway phone call at Thanksgiving, the word immediate, the caterer's number that matched a total I already knew, because I was the one who'd paid it. There was a long pause on the line. Not an uncomfortable one. The kind of pause a man takes when he's deciding how much respect to show you by not softening what comes next. "Eleanor," he said finally, "you've been funding this family's comfort for years without anyone acknowledging it, and now they've decided your presence is optional, but your money apparently is not. I've seen this pattern more times than I can count. The good news is, you're in an unusually strong position to stop it. The paperwork is entirely in your name. Nothing here requires anyone's permission but yours." "I don't want to hurt my son," I said. "I know," he said.
"That's exactly why we're going to do this carefully and calmly and correctly. Not out of anger, out of clarity." I hadn't cried once through that whole call. Not from sadness. I think somewhere around the middle of it, I felt something closer to relief. The specific relief of a woman who has just confirmed that the thing she suspected quietly for years was in fact entirely true, and that she is in fact entirely capable of doing something about it. "I'm proud of you for calling," he said right before we hung up. "Robert would be too." I sat at that desk for a long time after the call ended, looking at the folder, at Robert's careful handwriting on the sticky note. 42 years of marriage, and the man was still taking care of me from beyond it. Here is something I have learned at 68 years old that I wish someone had told me at 30. An apology that comes in the wrong order is not an apology. It is a negotiation. Claire texted me the next morning, not to explain the shower, not to ask why I'd called the caterer. She texted because the caterer had called her, confused, asking whether the account holder, meaning me, had made any changes to the reservation. I hadn't, not yet. I was simply asking questions, but it had clearly rattled her enough to reach out. "Hey, Ellie, I heard you called about the shower booking. Everything okay?"
Just want to make sure there's no confusion. A smiley face. After uninviting me from my own granddaughter's baby shower using the word immediate, she sent me a smiley face to make sure there was no confusion. I did not answer that day. I let it sit. Silence, I've found, is a kind of arithmetic. It makes people do the math themselves, and the answer they arrive at alone always lands harder than anything you could have told them. That wasn't the worst thing hiding in that folder either, because 2 days later, going back through 6 years of bank statements to prepare everything properly for Mr. Whitfield, I found something I had never noticed because I'd never had a reason to look. A recurring transfer, small, monthly, out of the joint account David and I still technically shared from years back, an account I'd forgotten even existed, opened when he was in college that I'd simply never closed. $200 a month for the last 3 years, transferring quietly into an account under Claire's name alone. I am a bookkeeper, was a bookkeeper for 30 years. I know what an unexplained recurring transfer looks like, and I know what it usually means when a wife keeps money moving into an account her husband doesn't know about. I didn't jump to conclusions. I am not a woman who jumps. But I called Mr.
Whitfield back, and I asked him calmly what my rights were regarding an account that was technically still legally mine. I want to pause here and tell you something plainly, the way I'd tell it to a friend at my kitchen table. If you've ever felt the particular cold stillness of realizing you've been quietly paying for your own disrespect, that the very money you gave out of love was being used in some rooms as proof that you were nothing more than a convenient wallet, then you already understand exactly what I decided to do next. Stay with me. This is the part where everything moves. The following Tuesday, I did 4 things, in this order, calm as Sunday. First, I called the caterer back, and, as the account holder, simply asked them to hold the booking under my name only, effective immediately, pending confirmation of guest list. A technicality, but a true one, and one that meant nothing could proceed without my say-so. Second, I contacted the small property management company that handled our old rental, the one from 1994, the one nobody talked about, and instructed them to begin the process of listing it for sale. Quiet listing, no signage on the lawn, agent-only showings. Robert always said a quiet sale gets a better price than a desperate one, and I intended to prove him right one more time. Third, I closed the old joint account, politely.
In person, at the bank, with my identification and Robert's death certificate, and 41 years of being a customer there. And the manager didn't ask a single question beyond whether I wanted the remaining balance as a check or a transfer. I took the check. Fourth, and this was the one that took the most courage, more than any of the paperwork, I called David. He answered on the first ring, which told me Claire had already talked to him about the caterer, and probably about the account too, closing that fast. "Mom," he said, and his voice had that particular strain I remembered from when he was 17 and had wrecked the car and hadn't told me yet. "What's going on? Claire said you canceled her card on some old account, and the caterer saying the booking's under review or something." "I didn't cancel anyone's card," I said. "I closed an account that's been sitting in my name since you were 19. I'm allowed to close my own accounts, David." "But why now? Why all of a sudden?" I let a beat pass. Not for drama. For accuracy. "It's not sudden," I said. "It's 6 years late." He didn't say anything for a moment. I could hear him breathing. The particular quality of breath a person has when they're standing in a room they don't want to be standing in. "Mom, whatever this is about, Claire didn't mean anything by the shower thing. She just wanted it small. It's not—" "David," I said, and I kept my voice the way I keep it when I balance a ledger that doesn't add up. Flat, patient, unhurried. I paid the deposit on that shower 11 weeks ago. I found out 3 days ago that I wasn't invited to it. I would like you to sit with that fact for a moment before you tell me what Claire didn't mean." Silence on the line. Real silence. The kind that means someone is doing math they've avoided doing for a long time. "I didn't know you paid for it," he said finally, quietly. "I know you didn't," I said. "That's not an accusation. That's the whole problem." By Friday, the call started. Not from David, from Claire. 7:12 in the morning, missed. 7:45, missed. 9:03, a voicemail. Ellie, hi, it's Claire. I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding. Can you call me back? 11:20, another missed call. 1:47, a text. Ellie, please call me. I don't understand what's happening with the property listing. Is everything okay? 3:30, a voicemail, her voice tighter now. Ellie, David just told me about the joint account, and I really think we need to talk before anyone does anything they can't take back. 6:15, a text from David. Mom, can you please just call us back? 8:02.
A voicemail from David's sister-in-law, someone I barely spoke to, clearly recruited. Hi, Eleanor. I know this isn't really my business, but Claire's really upset, and I just think family should talk things through, you know? 9:40. Claire again, voice cracking slightly. Ellie, I know I hurt your feelings about the shower. I'm sorry, okay? I'm sorry. Can we please just talk? 9 calls in one day. I let every single one go to voicemail. I sat in my kitchen, at the same counter where I'd first read that 4-sentence text with the periods, and I listened to each message once, all the way through, and then I did the dishes. Robert used to say that the loudest people in a family are usually the ones who've had the quietest consequences up until now. I think he would have found this whole day very familiar. That wasn't even the most serious conversation I had that week. The most serious one happened 3 days later, in a small conference room with dark wood paneling and a box of tissues on the table that notably I did not need. I sat across from David and Claire. Mr. Whitfield sat beside me, folder open, pen capped, patient. I had asked David to bring Claire because whatever came next needed to be said to both of them, together, once, clearly, so there would be no confusion afterward about who had heard what.
Claire spoke first, the way people who are frightened usually do. Fast, over-explaining, reaching for context before anyone's even asked a question. Ellie, I want to start by saying I'm sorry, okay? I really am. The shower thing came out wrong. I just wanted something intimate, that's all. And I know that probably felt. How much rent have you paid me? I asked. She stopped, blinked. What? The rental property, the one I'm listing. How much rent have you or David ever paid on it or toward it in 20 years? None, but that's not... How much did the crib cost? I asked. The one in Sophie's nursery. I don't know exactly. David handled. I do. I paid it. How much was the shower deposit? Ellie, I don't see what any of this... $200 a month, I said, for 3 years, out of an account with my name on it, into an account with only yours. Can you tell me what that was for? The room went very still. David turned to look at Claire, and I watched something shift in his face. Not shock exactly. Recognition. The particular recognition of a man realizing he already knew the answer and had simply chosen, for a long time, not to ask the question. Claire's composure cracked just slightly at the edges.
I was putting money aside for us, for the second baby. I didn't want to ask you for more. I know how that looks, but I wasn't hiding it. I was going to tell David eventually. $200 a month for 3 years is $7,200, I said. That's not a savings habit, that's a pattern. And a pattern nobody tells you about isn't a surprise, Claire. It's a decision. She started to cry then, the kind of crying that comes from being caught rather than from remorse, and I recognized the difference because I have lived 68 years and I have seen both kinds up close. I'm sorry, she said again. I'm sorry about the shower. I'm sorry about all of it. Things got complicated, and I felt like you were always around, always watching, and I just wanted one thing that was just... Apologies in the wrong order are not apologies, I said, quietly, the way I'd say it to myself in a mirror. They are negotiations. You are sorry the money is out in the open. You have not once said you're sorry for taking it. Nobody spoke for a long moment. David had his hands in his hands. Mr. Whitfield uncapped his pen, which was the only sound in the room. I'm not here to punish anyone, I said, and I meant it. I'm here because I spent 6 years being generous and being told quietly that my generosity was an inconvenience. I'm not angry. I'm simply done funding a relationship that only remembers I exist when there's a bill involved. 2 weeks later, time anchor, the way Robert used to mark things on the calendar in the kitchen. 2 weeks from the Tuesday everything cracked open.
The property sold, quietly, for more than we'd paid for it in 1994, obviously, and I split the proceeds 3 ways in my head before I ever told anyone. A portion into a trust, untouchable, in Sophie's name and her unborn sibling's name both, to be accessed at 25, not 18, because 18-year-olds make decisions the way I once did, in a hurry and without enough information. A portion I kept, quietly, for myself, because Robert had told me to protect myself first, and I finally understood what he meant. And a small portion, the smallest, that I set aside separately in an envelope with a note. The joint account closure went through cleanly. The bank sent a final statement with a 0 balance and my name, only my name, at the top. Claire did not call again after the conference room. David called twice a week, quieter than before, more honest.
He told me things I suspect he'd never said out loud to anyone, that he'd known about the transfers for almost a year and hadn't confronted her because he didn't want to blow up his marriage over what he'd convinced himself was just a little money. That he'd known, deep down, that uninviting me from the shower was wrong and had let it happen anyway because arguing with Claire had started to feel harder than disappointing me. I chose easy over right, he said to me on the phone one evening, his voice small in a way it hadn't been since he was a boy. I'm sorry, Mom. I really am sorry. That apology came in the right order. I could hear the difference immediately. There's a photograph I keep on the hallway table, the one everyone sees when they walk in the front door. It's Robert, 20 years younger than he was when he died, standing in front of the rental property the week we bought it, grinning like a man who'd just gotten away with something wonderful. I looked at that photograph a lot during those 2 weeks, and one night I sat down and wrote him a letter, the way you write letters to people who can't answer, and I told him everything. The text, the caterer, the $200 a month, the conference room, all of it. I told him I finally understood the envelope in the drawer.
I told him he was right, the way he was always quietly right about the things that mattered. I sleep better after writing those letters. I always have. There's something about telling the truth to someone who already knows it that settles a person all the way down to the floor of themselves. The baby was born 6 weeks later, a boy. They named him Robert. I found out from David on the phone, and I sat down hard in my kitchen chair when he told me, because I had not expected it, not after everything. And for the first time since that 4-sentence text with the periods, I did cry. Not from hurt, from something else entirely, something closer to being seen. Sophie, my granddaughter, is 3.5 now, old enough to ask real questions and old enough to notice real things, the way children that age suddenly start to. She came to visit me 2 Saturdays after her brother was born, just her and David, and she found the quilt. I don't know how it ended up out of storage. I never asked, and I never will, but there it was, folded on the back of the armchair in my living room, the one with the little embroidered stars I'd sewn by hand 3 summers ago. Sophie ran her small fingers over every star, slowly, one at a time, counting them the way I count things, the way her grandfather used to count things. And she looked up at me and said, "Grandma made this?" "Grandma made this," I said. "It's the best one," she said, with the total, uncomplicated certainty that only very small children and very old women seem to have anymore. I didn't correct her. I didn't tell her about the box it had spent 3 years hidden inside. Some truths are for grown-ups to carry, and some are for children to simply enjoy, star by star, without ever knowing there was a version of the story where the quilt never came out at all. Claire and I have not spoken since the conference room, not directly. She sent one letter, handwritten, 3 pages, that arrived about a month after the baby was born. I read it once, carefully, the way I read everything now. There was real remorse in it, I think, more than there'd been in the room that day. But there was also, still, a little too much explaining, a little too much reaching for reasons instead of simply sitting in what she'd done. I didn't throw it away. I don't believe in throwing away a person's honest attempt, even a clumsy one. I put it in the drawer of my desk, the same drawer where Robert's letter used to live, before I moved that one to my nightstand, where I could reach it easier at night. Claire's letter goes in a drawer, not the trash. Maybe someday I'll write back. Maybe I'll simply let it sit there, the way silence lets so many things sit and settle and become clear, until one day it isn't sitting anymore, it's simply resolved. For now,
David brings the children to see me every other Sunday, on his own, sometimes with Claire, sometimes without, and I have decided not to keep score of which Sundays are which, because keeping score was never really the goal. Clarity was the goal, and clarity, I found, doesn't need to announce itself loudly to be permanent. I still make the casserole. Old habits, the good kind, don't die just because a person finally learns where her own line is. People sometimes ask me, friends mostly, women my age who've had their own version of this story, because it turns out almost every woman my age has some version of this story tucked away somewhere, whether I regret how far I let it go before I finally acted, whether 6 years of casseroles and cribs and quilts nobody unwrapped was worth it, just to arrive at one Tuesday with a heavy dish and a 4-sentence text. I tell them the truth. I don't regret the giving. I regret the silence I kept around it, my own silence, the one that let a family believe generosity meant invisibility. I don't regret a single dollar that went toward that little girl's nursery, or that boy who now carries his grandfather's name.
What I regret is how long I let people believe that love, my love specifically, came with no boundary at all. It doesn't. Not anymore. That's not cruelty. That's honesty with a handle. I'm not angry. I'm simply done. And some nights, when the house is quiet and the porch light is the only thing still on, I think about that Tuesday. The gray sky, the warm dish, the 4 sentences with a period after every single one. And I think about how strange it is that the worst moment of that whole year turned out to be the one that finally set me free. I closed the drawer on the old envelope last week, put it back exactly where Robert left it, folder, letter, and all, because I don't need to read it 4 times a year anymore. I know what it says by heart now. I know what I'm capable of. And she slept the way a woman sleeps when she finally stops asking permission to be respected in her own family. Deep and even, and without a single dream about proving anything to anyone ever again.